When I was a child, I loved staring at the ceiling. You know that feeling lying on the cool cement floor, gazing at the tiny cracks in the paint above. No cell phone, no clock counting the seconds, no checklist of things to do. The only sounds were the hum of the electric fan or the distant crow of a rooster from the next street. Back then, I didn't know the word productivity. I had no idea there was such a thing as efficiency. All I knew was that I was happy. Ideas would come to my mind like fireflies, suddenly flickering, briefly soaring, then disappearing. Sometimes I'd imagine a story about an ant carrying a leaf bigger than itself. Other times I'd make up a song using a bucket as a drum and 2 sticks as drumsticks. No pressure. No deadlines. No one asked me, what do you plan to do with your life? But as we grow up, something happens. It's as if an invisible hand begins to arrange everything. The wide field-like expanse of childhood turns into boxes. The free flow of time suddenly gets labeled. 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Work. 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Exercise. 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Study. And those moments of doing nothing, the moments spent staring at the ceiling, suddenly became wasted time. We became smart. We learned to plan. We learned to systematize. And at first, it felt wonderful. We felt like superheroes who had discovered the power of discipline. We could save money, deliver projects, meet deadlines. People said, "You're so hardworking." They said, "You manage your time so well," and we believed them, because it worked. It was effective. But there was something we didn't notice while we were busy arranging everything. We have a part of ourselves that was quietly being strangled. Let's call it the creative soul. The child inside us who loved staring at the ceiling. The mind that didn't need a map to dream. The heart that didn't measure the value of happiness by how much was accomplished in a day. At first, I didn't notice it either, because I was busy being efficient. Remember when you were still in school? There were classmates whose notes were super neat. Highlighters, binders, color coding. You'd think they'd be the most successful, right? As for me, my notebook was filled with scribbles in the margins, drawings at the end, songs written on the back of assignments. It didn't look good. But that was where I was happy. That was where I learned. That was where I truly understood the lessons, not because they were highlighted, but because I had connected them to a memory, a color, a feeling. But the system loves order. The system loves what can be measured, so little by little I fixed myself. I removed the drawings from my notebook. I forced my thinking to become linear. I threw away the useless ideas to focus on the important ones. And yes, my grades improved. Yes, my daily routine became smoother, but something was lost. One night, I finished everything I had to do. Work was done. Chores were done. Everything was scheduled for the next day. I sat on the sofa. Silence. But it wasn't the happy silence of my childhood. It was different. It was the kind of silence where you feel like you're waiting for the next command. Because my brain had gotten used to always having something to do. I no longer knew how to do nothing. Life can be a cold journey, especially when the rain doesn't seem to stop and the city feels like a labyrinth of strangers. For Leo, the weight of the world had become too heavy to carry alone. He sat defeated, a ghost in a bustling world. But sometimes, a single shadow in the twilight brings a different kind of light. A light that doesn't just illuminate, but warms. Arthur didn't ask for a story. He simply offered a hot cup of coffee and a small, handmade wooden bird. That small wooden bird was more than a gift. It was a promise that even the most fragile things can find a way to fly. Over the following weeks, the bench became their sanctuary. Arthur shared stories of his own struggles, showing that scars are just maps of survival. Leo learned that empathy isn't just about feeling someone's pain, but about standing beside them until the sun comes out. The change in Leo was gradual, like the coming of spring. His posture straightened and the darkness in his eyes began to fade. He found himself reaching out to others, mirroring the kindness Arthur had shown him. Helping a neighbor was his first step toward redemption. Then came a pivotal moment. On a quiet street, Leo found a lost wallet, bulging with cash that could have solved all his problems. But he felt the weight of the wooden bird in his pocket. He realized that some things are worth far more than money. When he tracked down the owner, he didn't find a stranger. He found a woman whose eyes held a familiar, gentle spark. She was Arthur's daughter, who had been searching for her father for years. Leo's honesty became the bridge that reunited a broken family. In a sun-drenched garden, the ripple of one small act of kindness finally came back home to the man who started it all. Arthur realized that by saving a stranger on a rainy night, he had unknowingly paved the way for his own daughter to find him. Kindness is never a one-way street. It is a ripple in a pond that eventually touches every shore, including our own. Years later, Leo sat on that same bench. He was no longer the young man lost in the storm, but a man who carried the sun. He reached out to another struggling soul, passing on the same warmth and the same wooden bird that had once saved him. One good deed creates an endless cycle of goodness, a legacy that lives on long after we are gone. Because even in the darkest city, a single act of kindness can start a fire that never stops burning. In the heart of a city that never sleeps, thousands of lives intersect every second, yet most people remain strangers hidden behind umbrellas. For Sarah, today wasn't just another rainy Tuesday. It was the day her entire career hung by a single fragile thread. She clutched her portfolio tightly, watching the rain ruin her shoes and dampen her spirit. She felt utterly invisible to the world. But kindness often appears in the most unexpected forms. For Sarah, it arrived under a bright, sturdy umbrella and a pair of kind eyes. He didn't say much at first, just stepped beside her, sharing his shield against the storm. It was a simple gesture that changed everything. As they walked toward her destination, Elias spoke of small joys and the beauty that exists even in the middle of a downpour. His voice was like a steady anchor. Sarah found herself letting go of the anxiety that had been suffocating her all morning. When they reached the tall glass building where her future waited, Elias stopped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. He placed a handcrafted wooden token in her hand. It was carved with the image of a rising sun. He told her it was a reminder. "The sun always rises," he whispered. "Carry this with you and remember that no storm lasts forever." Sarah walked into that interview not as a victim of the rain, but as a woman who carried the warmth of a stranger's kindness. She spoke with a clarity and confidence she hadn't known she possessed. The token in her pocket felt like a glowing ember. Years passed, and the rain of that morning became a distant memory. Sarah had climbed the ladder she once feared was out of reach. Now a successful manager, she walked through the same halls, but she never forgot the man with the umbrella. One afternoon, she noticed a young intern in the break room, looking just as defeated as she had been all those years ago. Sarah didn't walk past. She stopped her busy schedule, pulled out a chair, and offered a listening ear. As she left, she pressed the wooden token into the intern's hand. The sun on the wood was worn smooth by time, but its message remained. The intern looked up, surprised, as Sarah echoed the words of Elias. "The sun always rises," she said softly. Like a stone dropped in a still pond, that one act of kindness began to ripple outward, touching lives Sarah would never even meet. Kindness is a currency that increases the more you spend it. It weaves a thread of connection through the chaos of the city. Across the park, an old man sat on his favorite bench, watching the world with a heart full of peace. Elias didn't know about the successful manager or the inspired intern, but he knew that the sun had risen once again. He knew that even the smallest light can pierce the deepest shadow, if only we are brave enough to share it. Kindness is the only investment that never fails. Start your ripple today. By the quiet riverbank, at the golden hour of sunset, stood a massive, ancient oak tree. At its feet, a slender golden reed swayed gently, dancing with the softest breeze. The oak looked down with pride, mocking the perceived weakness of the delicate reed. "I am strong and unyielding," the oak boasted. "You tremble at every breath of air." The reed remained silent, bowing low with a humble and graceful heart. Suddenly, the sky darkened. A fierce storm broke with violent lashing winds and heavy rain. The oak fought the gale with all its might, but its rigid branches began to snap. The golden reed simply flattened against the ground, flowing with the wind instead of fighting it. As the storm cleared, the mighty oak lay uprooted, defeated by its own rigid pride. But the golden reed stood back up, unharmed and shining brightly in the morning sun. Remember, true strength lies in flexibility. It is better to bend than to break.